we should not be sitting around twiddling our thumbs. The clock is running. We face a fiscal cliff. There are some in this chamber who have said, oh, we just need to go off of it. We'll go off of it, we'll pay the price, and then we'll finally sit down and do what's right. I would, with all due respect, say that's pretty stupid.
That was some blunt talk from my next guest, Republican Senator from Georgia, Johnny Isakson. He was on the Senate floor. That was just 2.5 weeks ago. Well, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Since that date, both the president and House Republicans have offered their own solutions to the fiscal cliff, but we're no closer to a deal. Joining me now is Senator Isakson. Good morning, Senator Isakson. I assume you stand by what you said just 2 weeks ago. So let me ask you this. The initial offer by Speaker Boehner, is it fair to say, is it fair that the White House is calling it an unserious offer since it doesn't do anything on tax rates?
No, I don't think so at all. In fact, I think it's more reflective of a Simpson-Bowles type of approach, although it's Simpson-Bowles light. It's not the whole program. It's a first step. You know, I made a living selling houses for 33 years. You don't get people together until they finally sit down at the table and negotiate. It's still too much posturing, still too much the president wants it his way, somebody else wants it that way. I believe Tom Coburn was right. It's time to sit down in a room, see if we can work this thing out, because going off the cliff would be a very stupid idea.
I want you, David Brooks this morning writes this in the New York Times. I'm curious of your reaction to it. Republicans have to realize that they are going to cave on tax rates. The only question is what they get in return. Do you agree?
Well, not necessarily at all, because I believe if you raise the base upon which the tax rate is applied, you can raise revenue and keep the rates where they are.
Explain that. Let me stop you there. Explain that a minute. When you raise the base of which the tax rate is applied, explain what you mean.
Capping itemized deductions at a means-tested level, so you can't use deductions to offset tax obligations. That creates more revenue, but the rates stay the same, or in fact, as Erskine-Bowles Commission, actually go down, or can go down as much as from 35 to 29% at the upper level. Same thing Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill did in 1986. In 1986, the top marginal rate was 70%. It was lowered to 28%, but revenues went up because deductions were taken away. We can take that approach again.
You know, you brought up the fact that you were in real estate. One of the items that is going to be on the table is the mortgage deduction. And one of the criticisms that the White House had, for instance, on the Boehner plan, is that there was no details there on which deductions. How do you envision just dealing with the mortgage deduction tax credit?
Well, the idea that I like the most is by capping deductions in the aggregate, so you don't pick on one deduction or itemize deductions for mortgage interest deduction or for charitable deduction, but you just have an aggregate that's a cap. Maybe it's $35,000, whatever it might be. So you cap the total of deductions. You don't itemize them and pull one of them out and leave one of them on the table.
If we end up going over the cliff, because of this tax rate issue, is it something that Republicans ought to say, you know what, we can't deal with the White House on this, but let's just go ahead and pass this stopgap, which makes the middle class tax rates permanent, and then you punt, essentially Tom Cole's idea there in the House from Oklahoma, you punt and negotiate later?
The time to negotiate is now. It's not time to say we're just going to punt. It's time to negotiate is now. I'm beginning to believe, I don't know this, don't have any information to prove it, but it appears to me the president would just as soon us go off the cliff, everybody's taxes go up, sequestration take place, cut $1.2 trillion in spending, and then he'll come back and cut taxes for some people and try and claim himself to be the hero. I don't think that's the right way to go, because if you do that, you're going to have negative GDP for at least the first couple of quarters of next year, and a return to recessionary times.
So if nothing can get done, though, the House could pass that, could simply pass the making the middle class tax rates permanent.
They could.
But you're not in favor of doing that, even if that's the only way to avert things?
I'm not in favor of patchwork solutions to a macro problem. Taxes are an issue in terms of revenues, whether it's capping deductions or raising rates. Entitlements are an issue, and we've got to deal with entitlements. That's 2/3 of all federal spending, and discretionary spending is part of the problem. All three of those have to be addressed in a macro plan, or you're not going to solve the problem.
Do you believe that Benghazi, you're on the Foreign Relations Committee, so I want to ask you a quick question on Susan Rice. Do you believe that the Benghazi incident somehow disqualifies her to be considered for Secretary of State?
It will prevent her being confirmed until the White House comes forward with the answers to all the questions all of us have been asking. I think Susan Rice is a very capable and very smart person. She's well educated. She's done a good job as UN ambassador. But what happened on the 16th of September when she went on the talk shows and talked about blaming the attacks in Benghazi on a anti-Muslim trailer in the United States, when in fact we've come to learn that that intelligence people knew it was a terrorist raid, and we have no explanation as to why we couldn't protect our ambassador, and we lost our first ambassador in the line of duty since 1979. If those questions aren't answered, then there's not going to be a confirmation in my judgment. And that's not a reflection necessarily on Ms. Rice, but a reflection on the way the President and the administration have handled the entire Benghazi issue.
All right, I got to leave it there. Georgia Republican Senator Johnny Isakson, thanks for coming on this morning. Good talking to you.
Thanks, Chuck.